She stepped off the stagecoach already in tears. So why did the cowboy watching her look like he recognized something no one else could see? The driver hadn't even dropped the last trunk when her hand slipped on the iron rail, dust scraping under her boots. A soft, broken breath escaped her, barely louder than the creak of leather harness. But every head turned. She pressed her glove to her mouth, trying to hold it in, trying not to be seen, until a shadow moved closer, quiet, steady, and stopped the world just enough to change what came next. Have you ever had a moment where everything felt like it might fall apart? Tell me below. The stagecoach wheels had barely settled into the dust when the door swung open and she stepped down too fast. Her boot caught the edge of the iron step. For a second, it looked like she might fall. She didn't. She steadied herself with one hand on the doorframe, the other clutching a small, worn valise tight against her ribs. The kind of grip a person uses when it's the only thing left that feels certain. Iron Creek lay stretched under the late summer sun. Dry ground, faded boards, a wind that never quite stopped moving. A few men stood outside the general store, hats low, watching without trying to hide it. A woman paused mid-step near the water trough. Even the horses seemed to slow their chewing. Eliza Brooks didn't look up right away. Her shoulders trembled once, then again. She turned her face slightly, as if that might be enough to hide it. It wasn't. A tear slipped free before she could catch it. Then another. She pressed her gloved fingers to her eyes, quick and firm, like she could push the feeling back where it came from. No sound, no sobbing. Just the quiet kind of breaking that carried farther than noise. The driver jumped down behind her, boots hitting dirt with a dull thud. He stretched his back and muttered something about the road from Cheyenne, but no one answered. They were all looking at her. By the hitching post across the street, Jonah Walker shifted his weight. He had one boot hooked on the lower rail, hat tipped forward against the sun. He hadn't planned to stay long in town. Just supplies. Maybe a letter, though none had come in months worth waiting for. He watched her the way a man watches a storm rolling in from a distance. Not with fear, just with attention. She wasn't dressed like trouble. Her dress was simple, pale gray, travel-worn but still careful. Her boots were clean under the dust. Not a drifter, not someone passing through by accident. And still, she stood there like she had nowhere else to go. Jonah pushed off the post. He didn't hurry. He never did. He crossed the street steady, each step measured, until he stood close enough to hear her breath catch between one moment and the next. He took off his hat. "Ma'am," he said, quiet. She lowered her hands slowly. Her eyes were red, not wild, just tired, the kind of tired that didn't come from the road. "I'm fine," she said. It came quick. Too quick. The words landed flat between them. Jonah glanced past her at the half-circle of eyes gathering along the boardwalk. He stepped a little to the side. Not enough to touch her, just enough to break the line of sight. "You don't look fine," he said, voice even. "And this town ain't kind to folks who fall apart in the street." Her gaze flickered toward the watching faces, then back to the ground. "I didn't mean to draw attention," she murmured. Another tear slipped free. She brushed it away faster this time, jaw tightening like she meant to hold the rest in place. Jonah studied her a second longer. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated. Just a beat. "Eliza Brooks." "Jonah Walker." She nodded once. A small movement. "Careful." Behind them, the driver dragged a trunk down from the coach and set it in the dirt with a heavy drop. He looked between the two of them, then gave a short, knowing grunt. "She's the one answered your letter, mister," he said. The words settled hard. A few of the onlookers shifted. Someone whispered. Not loud, but enough. Jonah's jaw tightened, just slightly. 3 months ago, he'd written that advertisement by lamplight at his kitchen table. Simple words, no promises he couldn't keep. A house, work, a place to build something steady. He'd folded it himself, sent it off, and waited without expecting much to come back. 4 letters had come, then stopped. One hadn't. Eliza Brooks. Her letters had been neat, careful, honest in a way that didn't try to impress. She had written about books, about wanting a place where things didn't shift beneath her feet. She hadn't written about standing in the middle of a street with tears she couldn't hold back. Eliza looked at him now, really looked. Her eyes searched his face like she was bracing for something. Disappointment, judgment, regret. Jonah gave her none of it. I was waiting, he said. The driver shrugged and moved off, leaving the trunk where it sat. Silence stretched a moment longer. I'm sorry, Eliza said, her voice unsteady again. This isn't how I meant to arrive. Jonah slid his hat back on, not breaking eye contact. How'd you mean to? He asked. She swallowed, with dignity. Jonah nodded once. You still got it. The words caught her off guard. It showed in the way her breath paused, just long enough to notice. He stepped closer then, lowering his voice so it didn't carry past the two of them. You don't have to pretend with me, he said. For a second, she looked like she might argue, might put that mask back on and hold it there out of habit alone. Instead, her shoulders eased. Just a fraction. I'm afraid, she said. The truth came quiet, like it cost something to say it out loud. Jonah tipped his head slightly. Of me? She shook her head. No. A breath. Of starting over. And finding out I can't. Jonah looked past her, out toward the open stretch of land beyond the last row of buildings. Dry grass bending under the wind, sky wide and empty. Then he bent, picked up her trunk like it weighed nothing, and turned toward the wagon hitched nearby. You can tell me on the ride, he said. Or not. He set the trunk in the back and stepped aside. But standing here won't change much. Eliza stood where she was for a moment. The town still watched. Not as openly now, but enough. She tightened her grip on the valise. Then she moved. Jonah offered a hand when she reached the wagon. She took it, light and quick, and climbed up without leaning into him more than she had to. He swung up beside her and gathered the reins. The horses shifted, then started forward. Behind them, Iron Creek went back to its business, though slower than before. Dust rose under the wheels. The road stretched out ahead, pale and empty. Eliza sat stiff, eyes forward, the valise still pressed against her chest. Jonah didn't speak. The wind moved through the dry grass, carrying the last of the town's whispers away behind them. For the first time since stepping off that coach, she wasn't standing alone in the middle of it. The wagon rolled steady over the dry road, wheels creaking in a slow rhythm that didn't change. Dust rose behind them in a thin trail, hanging in the late afternoon light before settling back into the earth like it had never moved. Eliza kept her eyes forward. The town had disappeared behind a bend, but she still sat as if it were watching her. Her hands stayed tight around the valise, knuckles pale beneath her gloves. Once or twice she shifted, like she meant to speak, then didn't. Jonah didn't hurry the silence. He let the horses keep their pace. Leather reins rested easy in his hands. A hawk circled far overhead, its shadow slipping across the ground and gone again. After a while, Eliza spoke. I used to work in a school, she said, her voice low, as if the wind might carry it somewhere it shouldn't go. A small one, Just 3 rooms, children of different ages. Jonah nodded once but didn't turn. I kept the records. Attendance. Books checked out. She paused, drawing in a breath that didn't quite steady her. I liked knowing where everything belonged. The wagon rolled on. I was engaged, she added. The word sat between them. Not heavy, just present. Jonah flicked a glance toward her, then back to the road. All right, he said. He was well known, she went on. His family owned property. People listened when he spoke. A faint, dry sound escaped her, not quite a laugh. That mattered more than truth. The wind shifted, carried the smell of dry grass and sun-warmed wood. I ended it, she said, before the wedding. Jonah's hands tightened just slightly on the reins, and then, she continued, things were said. Quiet at first, then not so quiet. She brushed at her sleeve, though there was nothing there. I lost the school, the room I rented. The invitations stopped. Doors that used to open. She let the sentence fall away. Jonah didn't ask for the rest. They rode a stretch in silence. The land opened wider, the last fence from town long behind them. A low ridge came into view, and beyond it, something darker against the pale grass. That's mine, Jonah said after a time. Eliza lifted her eyes. A small house sat near the base of the ridge. Not large, not new, but straight. A barn off to one side. A line of fencing stretching out, uneven in places, but holding. Smoke curled thin from the chimney. It's not much, he added. She studied it, longer than she meant to. It doesn't feel empty, she said. Jonah didn't answer that. They reached the yard just as the sun dipped lower. The light turned softer, catching the edges of the roof, the fence posts, the dust still clinging to the wagon wheels. Jonah climbed down first, tying off the horses with practiced movements. He lifted her trunk from the back and set it by the porch steps. Eliza climbed down on her own this time. Her boots hit the ground with a small, solid sound. She stood still for a moment, taking in the place. The quiet here was different from town. Not heavy, just wide. Inside, the house held the warmth of a lived-in space. A wooden table near the window. 2 chairs, one pushed back slightly like someone had stood up not long ago. A shelf with a few books, their edges worn. A tin cup by the sink. A folded quilt draped over the back of a chair. Nothing polished. Nothing wasted. Jonah set her trunk near the wall and stepped aside. You can take the room at the back, he said. Fresh sheets. Water's in the basin. She moved slowly, as if she might disturb something by stepping too hard. Her fingers brushed the edge of the table, then the back of the chair. Light touches, testing. In the small bedroom, the bed was made neat. A simple coverlet pulled tight. On the narrow table by the window sat a small glass jar. Inside it, a handful of wildflowers, their stems cut uneven. Eliza reached out and touched one petal. You gathered these? She asked, her voice softer than before. Jonah stood in the doorway. Figured a place shouldn't look like no one was expected, he said. She nodded, though she didn't look at him. Evening settled in without much ceremony. The wind picked up as the sun dropped, slipping through the cracks in the wood with a low, steady sound. The kind that could keep a person awake if they let it. Eliza lay on the bed, fully dressed at first. Then, after a long while, she loosened her shoes and set them neatly by the wall. She didn't undress completely, just enough to rest. Every sound felt new. The creak of the floorboards, the shift of the wind, the faint clink of something metal in the other room. Downstairs, Jonah moved about quietly. He added a log to the fire, The flame caught slow, then steadied. He paused once, looking toward the hallway, then turned back to his work. He didn't knock on her door. Didn't ask if she needed anything. Didn't ask about the rest of her story. After a while, he stepped out onto the porch. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Eliza lay still, eyes open in the dim light. She listened. To the wind. To the fire settling. To the quiet that wasn't pressing in on her the way it had before. After some time, she sat up. The room held steady around her. The flowers by the window shifted slightly in the draft. She swung her feet to the floor and walked to the doorway, stopping just short of stepping out. "Jonah!" she called, not loud. The porch boards creaked outside. He opened the door and looked in, hat in hand. "Yes, ma'am?" She hesitated. "And if I fail here?" she asked. The question hung between them, fragile and real. Jonah didn't answer right away. He stepped inside, just enough that the light from the fire reached her face. Then he looked past her, through the window, out toward the dark stretch of land beyond the house. "Then we fix what's broken," he said. No promise, no grand words. Just that. Eliza held his gaze for a second longer, then nodded. He stepped back out, closing the door again behind him. She returned to the bed, pulling the blanket up this time. The wind still moved through the walls. The house still made its quiet sounds. But somewhere between one breath and the next, her grip loosened. Not all the way. Just enough. Morning came early on the prairie. A pale strip of light slipped through the window before the sun had fully risen, touching the edge of the table, the back of the chair, the small jar of flowers that had already begun to wilt at the tips. The house held that quiet stillness that comes before work begins. Eliza was already awake. She stood at the table with her sleeves rolled, pressing dough with slow, steady hands. Flour dusted her fingers, her wrists, a faint line along her cheek where she must have brushed it without noticing. The movements were careful, measured, as if she were learning the space through touch. The door opened behind her. Jonah stepped in, boots leaving a faint trail of dry dirt across the floor. The smell of hay and morning air followed him. He stopped when he saw her. "You don't have to be up this early," he said. She didn't look up. "I know," she answered. "But I am." He crossed to the basin, poured water from the tin pitcher, and washed the dust from his hands. The water hit the metal bowl with a soft, steady sound. "You trying to get ahead?" he said. "Or keep from falling behind?" Her hands slowed. "For now," she said after a moment, "I'd settle for not being in the way." Jonah dried his hands on a cloth, then leaned one shoulder against the wall. "You rode all the way out here on your own," he said. "That don't strike me as someone in the way." She pressed the dough once more, then stepped back. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "it's easier to keep moving than to stop and find out where you stand." He didn't answer that. Outside, the wind moved through the fence line, carrying the dry rustle of grass. Somewhere near the barn, a horse stamped once, then settled. The days found a rhythm after that. Eliza rose before the light. She swept the floor, kept the stove fed, wrote numbers into the small ledger Jonah kept near the shelf. Her handwriting was neat, steady, the kind that made sense of things just by looking at it. Jonah watched without saying much. On the third day, he asked if she wanted to ride into town. She hesitated just long enough for him to notice. "I should," she said. The ride in felt shorter, or maybe she noticed less of the distance. The land still stretched wide, the sky still too big to take in all at once, but her shoulders didn't sit quite as tight. Iron Creek looked the same. Same boards, same dust, same men outside the general store. But this time when they rode in, The looks came quicker. Not sharp, not yet, just longer than they needed to be. Jonah tied the horses near the post and helped her down without holding her longer than necessary. She straightened her dress before stepping away, smoothing it once at the waist. Inside the store, the air smelled of coffee, leather, and something sweet from a barrel near the counter. Mrs. Harper stood behind the register, spectacles low on her nose. She looked up, her eyes moving from Jonah to Eliza and back again. "You must be the one," she said. Eliza met her gaze. "I'm Eliza Brooks." Mrs. Harper nodded slowly. "Well," she said, "you'll find we don't have much here. But what we do have tends to last. It wasn't quite a welcome, but it wasn't a refusal either." Eliza moved toward the shelves, running her fingers lightly over folded fabric, jars of preserves, a stack of thin books near the back. She picked one up, glanced at the cover, then set it back in its place. A man stood near the stove, speaking low to another. He didn't look at her at first. Then he did. Just long enough. When she turned, he looked away. On the way out, she felt it again. That shift in the air. Not loud, not spoken, but there. They rode back in near silence. By the time the sun dipped low, the wind had picked up again, stronger now, pressing against the house in steady waves. That night, as Jonah worked at the table, repairing a worn strap with needle and thread, Eliza stood by the window. She didn't turn when she spoke. "They know," she said. Jonah didn't look up. "And know what?" "Enough," she answered. The thread pulled tight through leather with a small, sharp sound. He set the strap down, flexed his fingers once, then reached for the next piece. "Folks always think they know something," he said. She turned then. "Do you believe them?" The question landed clean. No hesitation, no softness around it. Jonah kept his eyes on his hands for a moment longer. Then he lifted them, resting them flat on the table. "I believe what stays," he said. She watched him. The wind hit the side of the house again. A low, steady push. "What does that mean?" she asked. He met her eyes now. "It means," he said, "you're still here." The words didn't settle all at once. They hung there between them, waiting to be taken or left. Eliza looked down at her hands. There was still flour caught in the lines of her skin. Still a faint tremor she hadn't quite shaken. Outside, the dark stretched across the land, wide and quiet. Inside, the fire held. But for the first time since she'd stepped into town, she understood something she hadn't before. Whatever had followed her here hadn't caught up all at once. It was coming, slow, steady, and this time she would see it before it reached her. The change didn't come all at once. It moved through Iron Creek the way wind moved through dry grass, quiet at first, then harder to ignore. 3 days after their ride into town, a rider came through the North Road just before noon. His horse was lathered from distance, but the man himself sat easy in the saddle, like he wasn't in a hurry to be anywhere. Eliza saw him from the yard. She had been hanging a line of washed cloth near the side of the house, the fabric snapping lightly in the breeze. She paused when the sound of hooves carried closer. Not fast, not cautious either. Certain. The rider didn't stop at the gate. He rode past once, eyes moving over the house, the fence line, the barn. Then he circled back slow, as if measuring something. Jonah stepped out from the shade of the porch. He didn't call out, just stood there, one hand resting lightly against the post. The rider pulled up a few yards off. Silas Crow. He took off his hat with a faint, practiced motion, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Afternoon," he said. Jonah gave a short nod. Silas's gaze shifted to Eliza. It lingered a second longer than it should have. Not rude, not open, but not kind either. "So," Silas said, "this is where you ended up." Eliza didn't move from where she stood. The cloth in her hands hung loose now, forgotten. "I don't believe we've met," she said. Silas smiled, thin. "Not properly," he replied, "but I've heard enough." Jonah's jaw tightened, just slightly. "That's so," he said. Silas tipped his head. "News travels," he said, "even out here." The wind pressed against the house again, stronger now. The cloth on the line snapped sharp once. Eliza folded it slowly, buying herself a breath. "What kind of news?" she asked. Silas looked at her like a man deciding how much to say. "The kind that follows a person," he answered, "no matter how far they ride." Jonah stepped forward then. Not enough to close the distance, just enough to be seen standing there. "She's not looking for company," he said. Silas's smile didn't change. "Didn't figure she was," he replied. "But folks in town might be interested." He settled his hat back on his head. "Wouldn't want anyone surprised later," he added. The words sat in the air a moment too long. Then he turned his horse and rode off, not looking back. The dust took its time settling after him. Eliza stood still until the sound of hooves disappeared. Only then did she let out the breath she had been holding. Jonah didn't say anything right away. He walked to the fence, checked the latch, though there was nothing wrong with it. Then he turned back. "You know him," he said. It wasn't a question. Eliza shook her head once. "No," she said, "but I know the kind." That evening, the wind didn't settle. It carried through the boards, low and constant, like something trying to find its way inside. They ate in near silence. Eliza kept her hands steady, though once the spoon struck the edge of her bowl a little too hard. Jonah noticed, said nothing. After supper, he stepped outside again, checking the fence line with a lantern in hand. Habit more than need. When he came back in, Eliza was standing by the table, both hands flat against the wood. "They'll start talking," she said. Jonah set the lantern down. "They always do." She looked at him. "This isn't the same," she said. "No," he agreed. "It ain't." Another pause. The fire cracked softly in the hearth. Eliza moved to the window, looking out into the dark where the land disappeared. "I didn't run far enough," she said. Jonah crossed the room slowly. "You didn't run," he said. "You came." She let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh, but didn't quite make it. "They'll believe him," she said. "They always do." Jonah stood beside her, not touching. "Maybe," he said. She turned then, searching his face again. "And you?" she asked. The question came back, sharper now. He held her gaze. "I told you already," he said. The wind pressed harder against the house, rattling the shutters once. "I believe what stays." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Not because it fixed anything, but because it was something she could stand on. Outside, the prairie stretched wide and dark, and somewhere beyond it, whatever had been set in motion was already moving closer. The next morning, the wind had settled. Not gone, just quieter, like it had spent itself during the night and had nothing left to prove. Eliza stepped out onto the porch with a tin cup in her hands. The coffee inside had already gone lukewarm, but she held it anyway. The yard looked the same. Fence line straight, gate closed, barn door hanging just a little off-center, like always. Nothing had changed. And yet, something had. She set the cup down on the railing and walked out toward the fence. The ground was firm under her boots, still holding the memory of yesterday's wind. She stopped where the grass thinned near the posts and rested her hand lightly against the wood. Inside the house, Jonah moved slow, gathering tools, checking straps. He didn't call out to her. He didn't need to. By mid-morning, a rider passed on the far road. Eliza saw him from a distance, too far to make out his face, but the direction told her enough. From town. Heading out. Carrying something with him. By afternoon, she rode in alone. Jonah had offered to come. She shook her head once. "I won't stay long," she said. He studied her for a second, then nodded. "Bring back flour if you pass the store," he said. Nothing more. The ride into Iron Creek felt different this time. Not quieter, sharper. When she reached the main street, she tied Belle near the post and stepped down without waiting. Her movements were steady, not rushed, not slow either. Inside the general store, the air shifted the moment she crossed the threshold. Voices didn't stop, but they lowered. Mrs. Harper stood behind the counter again, hands resting on the wood. "Eliza," she said. Eliza inclined her head. "I need flour," she answered. Mrs. Harper nodded and turned to the shelves. Near the stove, two men stood close, their voices low but not low enough. Heard she left in a hurry. Back east. Something about a man. Eliza reached for the cloth bag on the counter. Her fingers closed around it. Held. She didn't turn right away. Didn't rush to speak. Then she did. "I did leave in a hurry," she said, her voice carrying just enough. The room didn't go silent, but it stilled. She turned then. "Because I refused to marry a man who believed he could decide what my life was worth." The words didn't rise. They settled. One of the men looked down. The other shifted his weight, suddenly interested in the floorboards. Mrs. Harper placed the sack of flour on the counter with a soft thud. "That'll be 2 bits," she said, as if nothing had changed. Eliza reached into her bag, counted the coins without hurry, and set them down. When she stepped back outside, the light felt stronger, not warmer, just clearer. She untied Belle, mounted in one smooth motion, and turned toward the road without looking back. By the time she reached the ridge, the wind had picked up again, but it didn't press against her the way it had before. Jonah was at the fence when she returned. He had one knee bent against the lower rail, hammer in hand, a loose board at his feet. He looked up when he heard her. She didn't speak right away, just slid down from the saddle and stood there, holding the reins loosely. "They're talking," she said. Jonah nodded once. Figured they would. She stepped closer. "I told them," she added. He set the hammer down. "What did you say?" She met his eyes. "The truth," she answered. He watched her for a second longer than usual. Then he reached for the board, set it back into place, and tapped it twice with the hammer. "Solid." "That holds," he said. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was keeping. That evening, the sky turned soft before dark. No sharp wind, no rattling shutters, just a low, steady quiet stretching across the land. They sat on the porch without speaking. The last light faded slow, leaving the outline of the fence, the barn, the open stretch beyond. After a while, Eliza shifted, resting her hands in her lap. "I didn't cry because I was weak," she said. Jonah didn't look at her. "No," he replied. "You cried because you were done holding it in." She nodded once. The words didn't need anything added to them. Inside, the fire burned low. Outside, the prairie breathed steady and even. Later that night, she lay down without keeping her boots close by. Didn't listen for every sound. Didn't measure the distance between one moment and the next. The wind moved through the walls, softer now. The house settled around her, And somewhere between one breath and the next, she let go. Not everything, just enough to sleep. For the first time since she had stepped off that coach, she didn't wake to check if the world had changed around her. She rested, and it held. If you had been there, you might not have noticed the moment it happened. No grand gesture, no sudden change in the sky. Just a quiet house, a steady breath, and a woman who no longer felt the need to keep one eye open against the dark. Maybe you've known that kind of tired. The kind that doesn't come from work, but from holding yourself together for too long. From walking into rooms where you have to measure every word, every step, every glance. And maybe, just maybe, you've wondered what it would feel like to set that down. Not all at once. Not perfectly. Just enough. Eliza didn't find a new life because everything around her changed. She found it because she stopped shrinking inside it. Because someone stood beside her without asking her to be smaller, quieter, or easier to accept. Sometimes love doesn't arrive loud. Sometimes it's just a voice, low and steady, saying you don't have to pretend. And sometimes, that's enough to begin again. If this story stayed with you, tell me where you're watching from. I'd like to know how far it traveled, and if you feel like there are still pieces of your own story waiting for a place to land. There are more like this one. Stories about second chances, about quiet strength, about finding your way back to yourself, one step at a time.